Hey, fellow night wanderers, imagine the moment you slam the last episode of a binge watch, and the darkness outside turns into a shimmering star gate humming like a lazy cat purring in the void. Yeah, that's our launch pad. Before we drift, smash that like button if you love being teleported to bedtime, and drop a comment telling me your weirdest pre-sleep ritual. Extra points if it involves cold pizza. Dim the lights, pull the blankets like a superhero cape, and let the faint scent of lavender and distant ozone curl around you like a cosmic hug. You step through the gate, feeling the cool whisper of nebulae against your cheek, hearing the soft crackle of far-off supernovas that sound suspiciously like your phone's battery warning. It's like trying to get Wi-Fi in a black hole. Impossible, but we'll cheat with a soundtrack of stardust lullabies that make your thoughts melt faster than ice cream in a sauna. Question for you. Do you need a passport to travel this night, or is a yawn enough to punch a ticket? Let's glide together, and tell me in the comments what dreamscape you'd love to explore tonight, because the universe is listening. In the sleepy hamlet of Luminara, where the cobblestones still smelled of goat cheese and rain, the dawn broke like a shy cat stretching its paws. Young Arya, the village's self-appointed dream weaver, spent her mornings stitching moon-silver ribbons into the hair of sleeping cats, hoping they'd purr sweet lullabies. She was as curious as a squirrel on espresso, forever poking at mysteries that most folk kept locked behind their shutters. One night, the moon rose full and fat, casting a silver spotlight on the ancient oak that guarded the village square. The oak's bark glistened with dew, and a low, melodic hum rose from its roots, as if the tree were humming a lullaby from a distant galaxy. Arya tiptoed closer, her boots crunching on moss that smelled faintly of wet earth and old secrets. Beneath the oak's gnarled roots she uncovered a circular aperture, rimmed with runes that twinkled like fireflies caught in amber. The gate pulsed with a soft blue light, humming a tune that reminded her of a forgotten video game boss theme, only less threatening and more soothing. As she brushed her fingertips over the cool stone, a rush of lavender and ozone flooded her nostrils, making her sneeze like a dragon with allergies. The gate seemed to breathe, expanding and contracting as if it were a giant, patient lung waiting for a willing breath. Before Arya could plunge headfirst into the glowing portal, a frail voice croaked, "Hold your horses, kiddo," and out stepped Selene, the village's elderly keeper of oddities. Selene's hair was a tangled mess of silver threads, each strand smelling faintly of mothballs and midnight tea, and her eyes glittered with the mischief of a cat that just knocked over a vase. "That there's the Whispering Gate," she announced, tapping the stone with a wooden cane that squeaked like a squeaky toy left in a bathtub. She warned Arya that the gate only opened for those truly yearning for peaceful slumber, not for the insomniac gamers who binge-watch entire seasons at 3 a.m. With a wink, Selene offered Arya a cup of warm milk spiked with honey, claiming it would smooth the edges of any restless mind, and she certainly didn't mind the extra calories. Selene taught Arya the ancient rite of the dream kiss, a gentle chant that sounded suspiciously like a lullaby from a 90s cartoon, but with a deeper, resonant hum. As Arya whispered the verses, the gate's hum rose to a chorus, and the air filled with the scent of fresh baked bread and distant sea salt, making her stomach grumble in protest. The gate's surface rippled like a pond disturbed by a mischievous otter, and a soft, velvety voice whispered, "Only the weary may pass," echoing the irony of a world that prized hustle over rest. Arya felt a tug at her heart, a blend of excitement and the kind of nervousness you get before stepping onto a roller coaster that's actually a lazy river. With a grin that could outshine the moon, she stepped forward, feeling the gate's cool surface kiss her fingertips like a polite handshake from a polite robot. The portal yawned open, revealing a realm awash in pastel clouds that smelled faintly of lavender soap and toasted marshmallows. As Arya crossed the threshold, a gentle breeze brushed her cheeks, carrying the faint giggle of a sleeping child and the distant hum of crickets performing a midnight jam session. She emerged on the other side feeling as light as a feather tossed into a gentle stream, her worries dissolving like sugar in tea. Selene's voice followed her. "Remember, dear, the sweetest dreams come to those who learn to let the world's noise fade into background static," a line that would make any motivational poster blush. With a final glance at the whispering gate, Arya whispered a thank you, and the gate sealed with a soft sigh, leaving behind only the lingering scent of night bloom and the promise of countless sweet dreams to come. Arya pressed her palm against the humming arch of the star gate, and the world cracked open like a sunrise over a cracked egg. A torrent of molten gold and sapphire light surged forward, dragging her into a river of starlight that smelled faintly of ozone and burnt caramel. The current slapped her cheeks with a cold that tasted like peppermint on a winter night, while distant chimes sang the lullaby of galaxies far beyond. She clutched the silver locket her grandmother had given her, feeling its weight like a promise against the tide. With a gasp that echoed through the void, she surrendered to the celestial flow, eyes wide as the Milky Way itself. The river twisted into a maze of shifting constellations, each star snapping into new patterns, as if the night sky were a restless child rearranging its toys. Orion's belt stretched and snapped like a rubber band, while the Pleiades twinkled like a handful of mischievous fireflies caught in a jar. Arya's boots splashed through nebular foam that smelled of stale popcorn and old books, a scent that made her wonder if the universe had a snack bar. She steered by the glow of a comet that hissed like a soda can being opened, its tail leaving a trail of glittering dust that stuck to her hair. Every turn demanded a new rhythm, and she found herself dancing to a beat older than any drum on earth. Just when the river seemed to settle into a soothing lull, a troop of nebula nymphs emerged, their bodies composed of swirling clouds and glittering specks of stardust. They giggled like a chorus of crickets in a summer field, then leapt onto Arya's shoulders, whispering riddles that dripped with the same dread that haunts sleepless nights. "What walks on 4 legs at dusk, 2 at midnight, and 3 when you're terrified?" they sang, their voices echoing the ancient Sphinx's joke, only now the answer was a trembling heart. The riddles mirrored her own fears, of darkness, of silence, of the endless ticking of a clock that never stopped. Arya clenched her jaw, feeling the iron taste of resolve mix with the metallic tang of fear, and answered each puzzle with a grin that surprised even the mischievous sprites. The nymphs, impressed yet still cheeky, offered her a bargain. Solve the final riddle and they would part the river, granting her safe passage to the dreamlands. Their final question was a pop culture curveball. What's softer than a pillow, brighter than a sunrise, and can make a grown-up cry like a toddler watching Inside Out? And they twirled around her, sprinkling stardust that smelled oddly like fresh laundry. Arya thought of her mother's lullabies, the gentle hum of a night light, and the quiet comfort of a well-worn blanket, then shouted, "Hope!" The nymphs burst into a chorus of applause that sounded like clinking glasses at a celestial banquet, and the river's current slowed to a lazy, buttery glide. Their laughter lingered like the aftertaste of chocolate, reminding her that even the cosmos enjoys a good punchline. With the river now a tranquil mirror, Arya floated toward a horizon painted in lavender and honey, the sky humming a lullaby that made the stars sway like sleepy dancers. The water beneath her smelled of warm tea and pine needles, soothing the raw edges of the night's earlier chaos. She felt the gentle tug of the dreamland's calling, a promise of soft clouds and quiet breaths that would cradle her weary mind. As she slipped through the final veil, a soft sigh rose from the gate, like a tired dragon exhaling after a long flight. Arya opened her eyes to a moonlit meadow, her heart light, ready to drift into sweet, untroubled sleep. Arya slipped deeper into the astral plane, where the night sky swirled like spilled ink on a velvet canvas. The air tasted of cold metal and forgotten dreams, a metallic tang that made her throat tighten. Around her, distant chimes rang like a broken music box, each note echoing off invisible walls. She felt the pull of something ancient, a gravity that tugged at the edges of her consciousness. With a steady inhale, she steadied herself for whatever lurked beyond the next nebula of thought. From the gloom emerged the shadow weavers, silhouettes as thin as cobwebs and as dark as a blackout in a power outage movie. They hovered, their long, spindly fingers twirling invisible looms that stitched nightmares from stray, discarded thoughts. Each thread they pulled hissed like a snake sliding over a cracked sidewalk, releasing a scent of damp earth and burnt toast. Their eyes glowed with a mischievous amber, as if they'd just seen a cat video on a loop and found it endlessly hilarious. Arya's heart hammered, but curiosity nudged her forward like a mischievous child chasing a firefly. The weavers worked with feverish intensity, weaving terror into tapestries that fluttered like moth-eaten curtains in a haunted attic. One strand shimmered with the memory of a dentist's drill, another dripped with the sour stench of spoiled milk left out in summer. As they spun, a low, guttural chant rose, half lullaby, half guttural growl, making the surrounding ether feel like a sweaty gym locker. Occasionally, a stray giggle escaped their mouths, a reminder that even darkness enjoys a punchline. Arya watched, half horrified, half fascinated, as a nightmare of falling off a roller coaster turned into a vivid, nauseating swirl of vertigo and cotton candy. Remembering the ancient teaching of breath weaving, Arya slipped a calm inhalation into the chaotic loom, letting her exhale glide like silk through the weaver's frantic needles. The breath carried the scent of fresh rain on pine bark, a soothing perfume that softened the jagged edges of the nightmare threads. As she threaded her breath, the terrifying strands loosened, turning from razor-sharp barbs into smooth, silvery ribbons that glimmered in the dim light. The shadow weavers paused, their eyes widening as if they'd just been hit with a surprise plot twist in a sitcom. With each measured breath, Arya rewrote the tapestry, replacing dread with a gentle hum of crickets on a summer night. By the time the last wisp of terror dissolved, the shadow weavers resembled a troupe of exhausted stagehands, their dark silhouettes slumping like overcooked spaghetti. They muttered apologies in a language that sounded suspiciously like the subtitles of a bad sci-fi B-movie, promising to keep the nightmares on a tighter leash. Arya laughed, the sound echoing like a bell tolling in a quiet village, and whispered a thank you to the astral wines for the free lesson in dream crafting. She drifted onward, the silken strands of her calm trailing behind her like a superhero's cape, only softer and less likely to get caught in a door. As she vanished into the next star gate, she imagined the weavers trying to knit a sweater from moonlight, a project that would surely end in a cosmic knot. The massive star gate rose before Arya like a cathedral of midnight steel, its towering arches humming with a low, electric thrum that tickled the back of her neck. Inside, the dream core pulsed with radiant energy, a heart of molten sapphire that threw specks of light onto the cold stone walls. The air smelled of ozone and stale popcorn, a reminder that even cosmic wonders have their budget cuts. A distant echo of restless whispers rattled the corridors, as if 1,000 insomniac ghosts were gossiping about the latest celebrity scandal. Arya tightened her boots, feeling the weight of history press down like an over-enthusiastic storyteller at a medieval tavern. She planted her feet on the basalt floor and let the core's rhythm seep into her bones, matching its beat with the steady thump of her own heart. Each pulse sent a ripple of warm amber through her veins, coaxing her mind to sync like a drummer in a marching band that suddenly discovered a new tempo. The restless echoes surged forward, snarling like a pack of caffeinated raccoons fighting over the last donut. With a wry grin, Arya imagined the echoes as Twitter bots spamming the night with bad puns, and she steadied her breath to drown them out. The gate seemed to line in, listening for the moment she would either crack or conduct the chaos into harmony. Remembering Seleni's ancient lullaby, taught under a moonlit sky that smelled of lavender and old books, Arya lifted her voice, letting the melody rise like a phoenix on a karaoke night. The notes were soft as moth wings but sharp enough to slice through the lingering static, each syllable dripping with honeyed nostalgia. As she sang, a stray comet of starlight slipped through a crack, landing on her shoulder like a mischievous firefly. The lullaby's refrain, "Sleep, dear world, and dream in silver," echoed back, turning the gate's metallic clangs into a gentle harp chorus. Even the echoes paused, bewildered that a simple song could outwit their relentless chatter. The dream core steadied, its frantic glow mellowing into a warm, amber tide that washed over the chamber like sunrise over a battlefield. A wave of soothing light unfurled, painting the stone walls with soft pastel hues that smelled faintly of fresh baked bread and rain on dry earth. The once restless echoes dissolved into sighs, drifting away like exhausted party guests slipping out the back door. Arya felt the vibration of the core settle into her chest, a comforting thrum that reminded her of a grandfather's rocking chair on a lazy Sunday. The gate, now calm, hummed a lullaby of its own, promising safe passage to any dreamer brave enough to step through. With the core pacified, Arya slipped through the luminous convergence, the gate's light wrapping around her like a cozy blanket made of starlight and sarcasm. She emerged into a realm of gentle clouds that smelled of vanilla milkshakes and old libraries, a place where insomnia dared not linger. The journey felt like the ending credits of a space opera, complete with a triumphant brass fanfare that would make even the most stoic Jedi crack a smile. As she drifted toward the horizon of sweet dreams, she whispered a thank you to Selene, the ancient lullaby still humming in her ears like a catchy pop song hook. And somewhere, far beyond the gate, the restless echoes were probably still arguing over who gets the last slice of pizza, an ironic reminder that even the cosmos can't escape a good old kitchen dispute. The ancient stargate exhaled a sigh of silver mist as it eased Arya back onto Luminara's dewy hillside. Dawn unfurled like a golden scroll, painting the clouds in bruised purple and honey-yellow hues that made the early birds look like paparazzi. The cool grass tickled her bare feet, while the distant clang of the blacksmith's hammer sounded like a sleepy lullaby. Arya inhaled the crisp, pine-scented air, feeling the lingering hum of starlight dissolve into ordinary daylight. She smiled, because even heroes need a good stretch after a cosmic nap. Below, the village began to stir, its shutters creaking open as if yawning after a long night of dreaming. Women hauled baskets of fresh baked bread, the buttery aroma battling the earthy smell of damp earth and a stray goat's questionable perfume. Children chased each other around the fountain, their laughter ricocheting off stone walls like mischievous sprites. The baker's apprentice, still half asleep, tried to flip a doughy loaf and ended up launching it onto the mayor's polished boots, an accidental comedy that set the morning's tone. Even the old oak by the well seemed to sigh, its leaves rustling in applause for the sunrise's grand entrance. Now crowned the guardian of sweet dreams, Arya wore a cloak stitched from moon-woven silk and embroidered with tiny constellations that twinkled when she whispered. She patrolled the rooftops, sprinkling dust of lavender and night bloom onto windowsills, ensuring every sleeper would drift into bliss rather than nightmare. When a mischievous wind tried to steal a child's blanket, Arya snapped it back with a grin, muttering, "Not today, you overdramatic gust. This isn't a Disney villain scene." She chuckled at the irony that after traveling through galaxies, her toughest battle was convincing a toddler that a nightlight isn't a miniature UFO. Yet each sigh of relief she heard was a medal, glinting brighter than any star she'd ever crossed. The Stargate, its arches humming one last time, began to fade like the afterglow of a fireworks show on a quiet night. Its stone pillars, once pulsing with alien energy, now resembled weathered granite statues, their edges softened by the morning's amber light. Arya placed a hand on the cold surface, feeling the faint echo of distant worlds, and whispered a promise louder than any interstellar broadcast. "Future seekers, follow the glow, and I'll be your bedtime GPS." She wryly noted that navigation apps could never compete with a guardian who knows the exact frequency of a perfect snore. As the final ripple dissolved, a faint scent of ozone lingered, reminding everyone that magic, like coffee, sometimes leaves a lingering aftertaste. With the gate gone, Arya turned back to the waking village, her eyes scanning for any lingering shadows that might steal a dream. She tipped her hat to the baker, who was now proudly displaying his dough-covered boots as a badge of honor, and to the goat, which seemed to have learned the art of subtlety by standing very still. The sunrise, now a blazing banner, declared that night's adventures were safely stored in the vault of memory, ready to be replayed in bedtime stories. And as the villagers stretched, yawned, and whispered "good morning" like a chorus of sleepy trolls, Arya felt a gentle tug at her heart, knowing that tomorrow's dreams would need her watchful eye. In a voice half whisper, half song, she added, "May the force of rest be with you." And the day marched on, bright and slightly absurd. In the amber-drenched valley of Lyris, the wind whispered through gnarled oaks like a gossiping aunt at a family reunion. Young Aaron, whose eyes were forever glued to the night, trekked past the clamor of cicadas to a circle of stones half buried in moss. The stones thrummed, a low hum that vibrated through his boots and made the beetles jitter like nervous teenagers at a prom. He brushed his fingertips across the cold basalt, feeling a pulse that matched the rhythm of his own heartbeat. The air smelled of wet earth and burnt pine, a scent that promised both adventure and a dash of danger. Suddenly the stone circle sang, not with human voices but with the sighs of distant constellations. Orion's bow creaked like a rusty hinge, and the Pleiades giggled like a troop of mischievous sprites. The ancient legend of the celestial gateways unfurled in his mind, hidden arches in the sky that could whisk brave souls to other realms if they dared to listen. A low, gravelly chuckle echoed, the voice of the old star herder's warning of a darkness that gnawed at the edges of night. Aaron's skin prickled as the star's whispers brushed his ears, each word tasting like starlight mixed with stale cheese. He realized the valley itself was a stage, and the stones were the reluctant actors waiting for a cue. Aaron laughed half in awe and half because he imagined the stones as grumpy grandpas demanding respect. "Move along, kid, we've got a galaxy to guard," a line straight out of a sitcom about ancient rocks. He tried to mimic the celestial chorus, croaking a half-hearted rendition of the Orion hymn, which sounded more like a cat stuck in a washing machine. Yet the stones responded, vibrating louder, as if impressed by his audacity or simply amused by his lack of rhythm. The night sky above flickered, stars winking like paparazzi at a celebrity entrance, and Aaron felt a surge of pride mixed with the faint terror of a kid who'd just discovered a secret level in a video game. He tucked a scrap of parchment into his satchel, promising himself to write down every star song before the darkness stole the script. The darkness, however, was no polite nighttime intruder. It slithered like a tar-soaked worm, exhaling a sour, metallic odor that made Aaron's stomach churn. Shadows stretched across the valley floor, swallowing the fireflies and leaving a cold, damp chill that clung to his skin like wet wool. The stones' hum grew frantic, their vibrations turning into a frantic drumbeat that rattled the bones of nearby graves. Aaron could hear the distant howl of wind through hollowed trees, a sound that resembled a chorus of disgruntled ghosts complaining about overdue rent. He clenched his fists, feeling the grit of sand between his fingers, and vowed to keep the whispers alive, even if the night tried to mute them with its suffocating gloom. With the stone circle's song echoing in his mind, Aaron stepped back, the valley's night now a tapestry of twinkling whispers and looming dread. He imagined the celestial gateways as glittering doorways, each one a portal to a story waiting to be told, much like a Netflix queue full of untapped adventures. The wind carried a final chuckle from the constellations, as if to say, "Good luck, kid, don't forget your popcorn." Aaron smiled, feeling the weight of destiny settle on his shoulders like a comfortable, albeit slightly itchy, cloak. As the first tendrils of darkness brushed the horizon, the whispering stars sang louder, promising that even the deepest night could be brightened by a curious heart. The stone circle loomed like a weathered amphitheater of ancient stone, each monolith slick with moss and the sour tang of night-blooming lichens. Aaron brushed a cold hand over the runes, feeling the grit of centuries scrape his fingertips, while Kayla muttered a chant that sounded like a busted accordion in a wind tunnel. A chorus of crickets and the distant howl of a lone wolf stitched the darkness together, making the air feel as thick as stew left too long on the fire. Their lanterns flickered, casting jittery shadows that danced like nervous teenagers at a prom. Yet beneath the eerie tableau, a pulse of excitement throbbed in Aaron's chest, as if his heart had just found the Wi-Fi password to the universe. At the circle's heart lay a slab of meteorite glass, smoother than polished obsidian, but humming with a faint, metallic scent reminiscent of burnt hair after a bad haircut. The glass was etched with a map of constellations, each star a glittering bead of amber set against a midnight canvas, linked by lines that glowed like neon graffiti. Kayla traced a finger along the Orion belt, and the stone sang, a low, resonant note that vibrated through Aaron's teeth, making him spit out a mouthful of pine needles. The map shifted under their gaze, revealing hidden pathways that curled like spaghetti noodles around the night sky. Aaron laughed, half in awe, half because the whole scene felt like a cosmic version of Where's Waldo, except the Waldo was a portal. Deciphering the celestial script required more than clever eyes. It demanded riddles that tasted of sour milk and the patience of a monk waiting for a snail to finish a marathon. Kayla recited the ancient verses, each line a tongue twister that made Aaron's brain feel like it had been run over by a herd of caffeinated goats. When they finally aligned the star paths, a thin ribbon of light unfurled, humming like a refrigerator on a summer night, outlining the routes between worlds. The map warned of trials, rivers of molten silver, forests of whispering stone, and a banquet of cursed honey that would make even the bravest hero gag. Aaron swallowed a nervous chuckle, recalling his last encounter with a cursed honey cake that left him smelling like a beehive for a week. The irony was not lost on them. After centuries of myth, the universe seemed to have a sense of humor, offering a gateway that required a test involving a dance of the fireflies, a literal flash mob of bioluminescent insects that performed the Macarena at midnight. Kayla rolled her eyes, muttering that the gods must have binge-watched too many sitcoms. Yet the absurdity sparked a grin on Aaron's face, his breath smelling of campfire smoke and the faint, sweet rot of fallen leaves. They prepared for the first trial, stuffing their satchels with dried meat that squirmed like tiny, angry worms, because nothing says heroic quest like the smell of protein gone rogue. The night air crackled, and somewhere in the distance, an owl hooted a note that sounded suspiciously like a sarcastic applause. When the final constellation aligned, the dormant gateways shivered awake, spilling out a cascade of starlight that smelled like ozone mixed with old library books. The stone circle trembled, sending a spray of dust that tickled Aaron's nose and made Kayla sneeze in a rhythm that matched the beating of the celestial drums. A portal yawned open, its rim shimmering like a disco ball at a medieval rave, inviting them to step into realms where the sky dripped with liquid sapphire. With a daring nod, Aaron stepped forward, feeling the cool kiss of the unknown on his skin, while Kayla whispered a blessing that sounded oddly like the opening line of a famous space opera. The night held its breath, and the universe, ever the dramatic director, seemed to wink just before the portal swallowed them whole. Aaron slipped through the whispering pines of the star-veiled forest as if the night itself had handed him a cloak of darkness. The moon, a silver sickle, sliced through the canopy, scattering shards of light on mossy roots that smelled of damp earth and old secrets. Every step cracked dry twigs, a percussion that sounded like the opening riff of a forgotten rock ballad. Shadows stretched like lazy cats, and Aaron felt the forest's breath on his neck, cold enough to make his teeth chatter. He muttered a half-hearted joke about needing a night vision app, but the ancient trees gave no giggle in return. Soon a pack of shadowed beasts emerged, their fur black as spilled ink and eyes glowing like busted traffic lights. They snarled, a chorus of guttural growls that could rival a heavy metal concert in a cave, and lunged with claws slick with the scent of pine sap and something far less pleasant, rotting carrion. Aaron ducked, feeling the brush of their fur scrape his cheek, a prickly reminder that nature's beauty often comes with a side of slime. He thrust his wooden spear forward, the tip humming against the night air, and the beasts recoiled with a howl that sounded oddly like a cat stuck in a blender. Laughing despite the danger, he whispered, "Do you guys ever consider a career in stunt work? You've got the drama down." Beyond the beasts, the forest opened onto a clearing where the night itself seemed to pose riddles in a language older than any human tongue. A stone altar bore an inscription that glowed faintly. "What walks on 4 legs at dawn, 2 at noon, and 3 when the stars fall?" Aaron scratched his head, the moss under his fingers feeling like a damp sponge, and answered, "A tired dog after a marathon." The stones trembled, and a soft chuckle floated on the wind, Kayla's voice, as crisp as autumn leaves, testing his wit. She materialized from the shadows, her eyes reflecting constellations, and offered a second riddle about a river that never runs. Aaron, now sweating like a sauna goer in a sauna, replied with a grin, "That's my love life, always dry." Kayla stepped forward, her presence a shield of moonlight that seemed to push back the lingering darkness. She circled Aaron, eyes flickering like twin lanterns, and whispered, "The valley behind you is under siege by the night's own doubts. Protect it, or the stars will fall silent." The wind carried the metallic tang of distant rain, and Aaron felt the weight of the valley's heartbeat thudding against his chest. He raised his spear, now slick with forest dew, and declared his resolve with the bravado of a teenage superhero on his first day. Kayla smiled, a smile that lit the surrounding trees like fireworks, and the bond between mortal and sky tightened, as if invisible threads of starlight were being woven into his very soul. When the last echo of Kayla's challenge faded, Aaron stood alone in the clearing, the night humming a lullaby of crickets and distant owl hoots that sounded suspiciously like a low-budget sci-fi soundtrack. He felt the valley's pulse steady, a rhythm that matched the steady thump of his own heart, and he realized the trial had forged him into something more than a wanderer, perhaps a nighttime hero in his own right. With a mischievous grin, he tipped his hat to the unseen audience of constellations, whispering, "May the force be with you, even if you're just a twinkling speck." The forest exhaled, releasing a fragrant breeze of pine and fresh rain, washing away the grime of battle. Aaron turned back toward the valley, ready to guard it, his steps now echoing with the confidence of someone who just survived a mythic video game boss fight. The night hung heavy, a bruised moon swallowing the sun in a perfect eclipse. Villagers gathered on the cracked basalt plateau, their breath fogging like ghostly steam. In the center, Aaron cradled a shard of meteorite glass, its surface humming with a faint violet thrum. He traced the ancient sigils of the Orion belt, aligning the stone with the wandering stars as if matching a cosmic puzzle. A nervous chuckle escaped him. If this works, we'll finally have a shortcut to the afterlife, or at least a decent Wi-Fi signal. As the final sigil clicked, the glass flared, spilling liquid light that painted the clouds in neon turquoise. The heavens tore open with a roar louder than 1,000 war drums, spilling a ribbon of starlight that stretched from horizon to horizon. Sparks rained down like glittering confetti, each one sizzling against the cool night air and leaving a smell of ozone and burnt sugar. The portal pulsed, its edges flickering like a neon sign advertising interdimensional express next stop. Eternity. Even the owls froze mid-hoot, their eyes reflecting the swirling vortex as if they'd just watched the latest Marvel post-credit scene. But the celebration was cut short when a shroud of darkness surged from the opposite side of the sky. It rolled in like a spilled barrel of tar, swallowing stars and muffling the portals, humming into a low, mournful moan. The air grew thick, tasting of damp earth and burnt incense, and a cold that crept into bones like an unwelcome X. Aaron felt the portal's edge tremble, the luminous ribbon flickering as if someone had dimmed the lights at a Broadway show mid-act. "Great," he muttered. "The universe just hit the snooze button on our grand adventure." The darkness pressed harder, its tendrils clawing at the portal's seams, threatening to seal the gateway forever. Aaron lunged forward, his boots kicking up dust that smelled faintly of ancient cheese, yes, the kind that rots in forgotten tombs. He shouted ancient incantations louder than a street vendor hawking kebabs, each word cracking the silence like a broken record. Suddenly, a burst of laughter echoed from the void, a voice that sounded suspiciously like Yoda after a night of cheap ale. "Close the gate is him." The absurdity of a Jedi master offering advice in a primordial eclipse made the villagers snort, their fear momentarily replaced by bewildered giggles. With a final, defiant thrust, Aaron slammed the meteorite glass into the heart of the darkness, sending a shockwave of sapphire fire spiraling outward. The blackness recoiled, shrieking like a cat caught in a blender, and the portal flared brighter than a supernova at a rock concert. The gateway steadied, its edges humming a steady, reassuring tone like the bass line of a classic 80s synth anthem. As the eclipse waned, the sky reclaimed its stars, and the portal lingered, a shimmering doorway waiting for the next brave soul. Aaron tipped his hat, winked at the awestruck crowd, and whispered, "Next stop, the Milky Way's VIP lounge. No line, no cover charge." When the last humming of the crystal lattice faded, the portal steadied like a tired cat finding its favorite windowsill. Aaron, his cloak still smelling of pine sap and burnt incense, gestured toward the swirling doorway, while Kayla's laugh cracked the night like a firecracker. The lost night travelers, some cloaked in tattered blankets, others clutching moonlit jars, squinted at the glow, unsure if they were about to step into daylight or a cosmic Starbucks. With a nod, Aaron stepped forward, his boots crunching on the frost-kissed stones, and the group filed behind him as if following a celebrity on a red carpet runway. The valley held its breath, waiting for the first sunrise to spill over the ridge. The travelers muttered prayers to gods they barely remembered, their voices a chorus of cracked whispers and wheezing coughs from the cold night air. One elderly man, whose beard smelled of fermented goat cheese, swore the portal smelled like a fresh bag of popcorn, an odd comfort in the gloom. Kayla tossed a handful of glittering starlight dust into the wind, and it settled on the traveler's shoulders like sequins on a cheap costume. A teenage girl, eyes wide as satellite dishes, whispered, "Is this the final boss level?" And Aaron chuckled, noting that the universe had a sense of humor sharper than a sword forged by a caffeinated dwarf. As the last figure crossed the threshold, the portal began to pulse, its edges flickering like an old TV set trying to find a signal. Yaren raised his staff, and the crystal at its tip glowed a fierce amber, humming a tune that reminded him of a medieval lute version of Eye of the Tiger. With a decisive swing, he slammed the staff down, and the gate shivered, then sealed with a sound like a giant cork popping from a bottle of fermented honey. The air filled with the sharp scent of ozone and the faint, lingering aroma of burnt rosemary, a reminder that magic always leaves a culinary aftertaste. Even the night birds fell silent, as if waiting for applause that never came. When the first golden rays breached the horizon, the valley erupted in a cacophony of cheers, goat bleats, and the occasional off-key hymn from a wandering minstrel who sounded suspiciously like a karaoke singing Jedi. Children sprinted across the meadow, their bare feet slapping the dewy grass, while elders clapped their hands, their skin creaking like old parchment. Kayla tossed a handful of wildflowers into the wind, and they spun like confetti at a superhero's birthday party, landing on the heads of bewildered travelers who now smelled faintly of lavender and victory. Zarin, wiping a smear of nightshade sap from his cheek, raised his arms and declared, "Let the night be remembered, but let the day be even better, like a sequel that actually improves on the original." The irony was not lost on anyone. After all, they had just escaped a literal nightmare. As the sun climbed higher, the story of the portal's closure wove itself into the tapestry of valley folklore, told around campfires with exaggerated gestures and the occasional dramatic gasp. Future generations would point to the ancient stone circle and say, "That's where Aaron and Kayla saved the night travelers," kind of like the Avengers, but with more glitter and fewer CGI explosions. The myth of stargazing, once a quiet reverence for the heavens, now pulsed with the rhythm of a drumbeat, urging youngsters to look up and wonder what else might be waiting beyond the clouds. Even the wind seemed to carry the tale, rustling leaves like pages turning in a well-worn comic book. And so, under the same constellations that had guided the lost, the valley kept its promise. To cherish the night, celebrate the dawn, and never stop dreaming of portals that open with a wink and a sparkle. The river valley stretched like a green ribbon, its banks scented with wet reeds and the occasional whiff of goat cheese from a wandering herder. Dawn cracked open the night, and Nara, the village's youngest priestess, slipped out of her mud-caked hut with only a woven basket of figs for company. She paused at the old stone altar, feeling the cool bite of the night air on her skin and the distant croak of frogs like a low bass drum. As the first stars pricked the darkness, a sudden surge of color washed over her eyelids, as if the heavens had turned on a neon disco light. She gasped, clutching the altar's cold edge, while a stray firefly buzzed past, oblivious to the cosmic drama unfolding above her head. In her vision, constellations twisted like spaghetti noodles, each star a pepperoni speck that spun and sang in a language older than the river itself. The Milky Way unfurled like a glittering river of melted silver, and a comet streaked by, leaving a trail of sparkling dust that smelled faintly of burnt cinnamon. Nara felt the pull of the sky's heartbeat, a thudding rhythm that matched the drum of her own pulse, and she could swear the Orion belt winked at her like a mischievous wink from a movie star. The dream cracked open a portal of light, and she saw ancient faces, her ancestors, laughing, crying, and whispering secrets in a chorus that sounded suspiciously like a karaoke night gone rogue. When she finally awoke, The night air smelled of damp earth and burnt toast, as if the universe had just burnt its own breakfast. Word of Nara's luminous nightmare spread faster than gossip about a missing goat, and the village elders gathered beneath the great baobab, its bark rough as an old leather boot. The oldest elder, Grandfather Koro, coughed out a throat clearing that sounded like a rusty gate, then asked, "Did the sky just tweet us, child?" The younger counselors whispered about tradition, clutching their ceremonial knives like security blankets, while the firelight danced on their faces, casting grotesque shadows that resembled dancing llamas. A nervous apprentice priest, barely taller than a sack of grain, suggested they consult the ancient tablets, which were really just stone slabs with doodles that looked like modern emojis. Laughter rippled through the crowd, half nervous, half amused, as they realized they were about to argue over whether the cosmos was a divine storyteller or just a cosmic reality TV show. After a heated debate that smelled of incense, sweat, and a hint of river mud, the council declared the night sky a living tapestry that whispered to humanity, stitching stories into the fabric of every night. They proclaimed that each constellation was a character, each meteor a plot twist, and that the heavens spoke louder than any drum or gong. This proclamation cracked open the central conflict. The ancient ways demanded reverence for the known myths, while Nara's vision beckoned them toward the unknown, like a kid tempted by the forbidden last slice of pizza. Some elders clutched their ceremonial staffs tighter, muttering about preserving tradition, while others, still half asleep from the dream, imagined dancing with the stars like characters from a futuristic video game. The tension crackled in the air, as sharp as the scent of wet stone after a sudden rainstorm. As the council's decision echoed through the valley, a stray dog barked at the moon, its howl sounding oddly like a bass drop in a club track, reminding everyone that even the cosmos has a sense of humor. Nara stood at the edge of the fire, feeling the heat kiss her cheek, and wondered if the sky would ever send a sequel to her dream, perhaps a cosmic sitcom starring the village's chickens. The elders, now half confused and half inspired, began to sketch new stories on the ground, their charcoal lines resembling doodles from a teenager's notebook. The river whispered its approval, splashing against the stones with a gurgle that sounded suspiciously like a laugh track. And so, under a sky that glittered like a Hollywood premiere, the first night of sky storytelling began, setting the stage for a saga that would outshine even the most binge-watched series on Earth. When the desert wind tossed the caravan's canvas, Nara watched the dust-covered merchants unload a bundle of cracked clay tablets that smelled faintly of goat milk and river mud. The traders chattered about Sumerian star gods, celestial scribes who painted the night with prophecy, like cosmic Instagram influencers posting tomorrow's fate. Nara's eyes widened as she traced the cuneiform symbols, each wedge a tiny thunderclap of ancient ambition. The tablets whispered of a sky river that carried souls, a Milky Way-sized waterway that even the gods used for their weekend trips. And she felt the thrill of a detective in a sand-swept thriller, ready to decode the heavens. Back in the village, the elders scoffed, their brows furrowed like freshly plowed fields, insisting that dreams were merely the brain's way of sorting leftover dates and fermented barley. "Dreams are for the lazy," muttered old Jashar, while the children giggled, imagining Nara riding a comet like a rodeo clown. Nara's heart thumped against her ribs, a drumbeat of defiance against the chorus of doubt. She tossed a wry smile at the skeptics, noting that even the king once consulted a fortune-telling cat, so why not a star river? The market's clamor rose, a chorus of clinking copper and shouting vendors, as she prepared to prove the heavens could speak louder than gossip. That night the moon hung low, a silver pancake dripping honeyed light over the cracked mud of Nara's hut. She slipped into sleep and found herself drifting on a river of liquid starlight, the water humming like a choir of distant crickets mixed with the low rumble of distant thunder. Strange fish shimmering like polished obsidian swam past, their scales flickering with constellations that spelled out a name she didn't recognize. The river split, one branch curling toward a dark canyon that smelled of burnt incense and old bone, the other spiraling upward toward a radiant gate pulsing with warm amber. A voice, soft as sand slipping through fingers, urged her to follow the current that would guide the wandering souls home. When dawn cracked the sky, Nara scrambled to the clay tablets, ink-stained fingers trembling like a newborn fawn. She matched the dream's river to a cuneiform diagram of the celestial canal, a mythic waterway said to ferry the dead past the gates of Anu, the Sky King. The description mentioned a river of silver tears, which explained the dream's humming water and the fish that glowed like lost tick-tock stars. She could almost taste the coppery tang of the river's spray on her tongue, and the irony wasn't lost on her. The afterlife's express lane smelled like a wet market after a rainstorm. With a grin, she scribbled a note for the council, promising that the next harvest would be blessed by a Sky River flood, if only they'd believe. At the council fire, Nara unrolled the tablets, the crackle of flames licking the edges as she spoke, her voice rising over the hiss of cooking goat meat. She narrated the dream, painting the river in words so vivid that even the most stone-hearted elder could feel the cool splash against his cheek. The skeptics sputtered, but the youngest chieftain, who secretly loved sci-fi epics, whispered, "It's like the river Styx too, only with Wi-Fi." The council finally nodded, granting her permission to lead a ceremonial procession along the real river that cut through the oasis, hoping its waters would indeed guide the departed. As the sun set, Nara stood at the water's edge, feeling the universe's pulse sync with her own heartbeat, ready to usher souls into the star-sprinkled beyond. When the sun sank behind the jagged hills, a thin plume of dust announced the arrival of the Maya delegation, their feathered headdresses fluttering like nervous birds. They unfurled a bark-bound calendar, each glyph ticking like a cosmic metronome that counted not just days but the breaths of the night sky. Their leader, a wiry man named Ahau, declared that every dream was a rope bridge spanning the world of the living and the glittering realm of the stars. He laughed, saying even the gods need a good night's nap, and offered us a handful of cacao beans as proof that sleep is sacred. The air smelled of incense and wet earth, promising stories that would stretch across the heavens. Our stone observatory perched on the cliff, a jagged crown of limestone that scraped the clouds like a giant's fingernail. Inside, the air hummed with the low thrum of wind chimes and the sharp scent of rain-soaked moss, while the night sky spilled in through a cracked opening, spilling starlight onto the worn stone floor. Suddenly, dark clouds gathered, rolling in like an angry herd of elephants, and the wind began to howl a warning that sounded suspiciously like a bad karaoke rendition of a thunderstorm. The Maya's eyes widened. They whispered that the storm was a jealous spirit trying to drown the bridge between dream and sky. I could feel the ground tremble, a low rumble that made the ancient stones feel like they might crack under the weight of a celestial sneeze. Without missing a beat, Ahau raised his staff, its tip carved with a jaguar that seemed to stare back at the storm, and began a chant that rattled the very air. The Maya drums pounded a rhythm that matched the beating of our own hearts, while we clutched the cold stone railings, feeling the rain sting our skin like tiny ice needles. The storm surged, lashing the cliffs with sheets of water that smelled of iron and pine sap, and the observatory shuddered as if trying to swallow its own secrets. Yet, as the chant rose, the clouds hesitated, as if the night itself were listening to a bedtime story. I caught a glimpse of a shooting star slipping through the tempest, a wink from the sky realm that seemed to say, "Keep dreaming, mortals." Just when we thought the storm might swallow the observatory whole, a massive gust tore a section of the roof off, sending a cascade of ancient stones tumbling like a bad sequel to a disaster movie. The debris hit the ground with a thud that echoed like a drumbeat from the underworld, scattering dust that smelled of old blood and fresh rain. Ahua's grin turned iron gray, and he shouted, "Even the gods need a little remodeling," as he and his people scrambled to hoist the fallen stones back into place, their hands slick with mud and sweat. The storm roared louder, as if mocking our efforts, but the Maya's belief that dreams could stitch the sky to the earth gave us a stubborn resolve, and we began to work as if we were building a bridge out of nightmares. When the clouds finally gave up their tantrum, the sky cleared, revealing a moon as round and smug as a Hollywood director's ego. The observatory stood, patched together with bark, stone, and the sheer will of a people who treat dreams like blueprints for reality. Yahao bowed, offering a final cup of cacao, its bitter taste reminding us that even sweet things can be a little bitter when you're fighting a storm. We all laughed, realizing that the night's violent drama had turned into a cosmic comedy, starring us, a jaguar-toothed priest, and a mischievous wind. As the night deepened, the Maya whispered that the storm was just a dream trying to rewrite the stars, and we fell asleep under the same sky, feeling the bridges between our hearts and the heavens pulse like a living, breathing highway. The sky cracked like a cracked screen as the sun slipped behind the moon, and the whole riverbank settlement froze in a collective gasp. Women shouted, children clutched sticky figs, and the scent of incense mingled with the earthy perfume of damp clay. Torches sputtered, casting jittery shadows that danced like nervous tick-tokers on a wall. Nara, the wiry Sumerian scribe with ink-stained fingers, felt the hair on his neck rise, as if someone had brushed a feather over his spine. Even the village dog barked at the darkness, as if it sensed a cosmic Wi-Fi outage. Suddenly, a collective shiver rippled through the crowd, and everyone saw the same nightmarish vision, a black maw yawning, swallowing the glittering stars like a vacuum cleaner on a sugar rush. The void pulsed, emitting a low hum that sounded like 1,000 angry bees trapped in a jar. A cold sweat dripped into the sand, leaving dark rivulets that smelled faintly of burnt incense and old parchment. Mothers clutched their babies tighter, whispering prayers that sounded more like frantic text messages to the gods. The air thickened, heavy with the metallic tang of fear, as if the world itself had taken a deep, ominous breath. Nara's eyes darted to the Maya priest, whose jade headdress glinted even in the dimming light, and the two men exchanged a glance that said, "We're about to rewrite mythology together." The priest, named Ahau, muttered the ancient Popol Vuh verses, his voice low and rhythmic, like a bass line in a forgotten 80s synth-pop song. Nara flipped through his clay tablet, tracing the tale of the sun god Udu battling the chaos dragon, while Aher recited the story of the hero twins confronting the underworld's black jaguar. Their combined myths swirled like a spicy stew, each ingredient, cacao, barley, and a pinch of desperation, adding flavor to the looming dread. With a grin that bordered on manic, Nara whispered, "If we can't scare the void, maybe we can make it jealous of our drama." They sprang into action, gathering obsidian mirrors, fragrant copal, and a sack of fermented fish guts that reeked like a dumpster after a rainstorm. Nara chanted the Sumerian incantation while Ahau beat a ceremonial drum, its thump echoing like a heartbeat trying to reboot a frozen video game. The crowd formed a circle, their hands sweaty, their faces lit by flickering firelight that painted grotesque masks on their cheeks. As the ritual crescendo built, the void on the vision seemed to quiver, as if the darkness were checking its Instagram notifications. Suddenly, a burst of golden light shot from the mirrored shards, scattering across the sky like a fireworks display at a superhero movie premiere. The darkness recoiled, shrinking back into the corners of the mind, and the sun burst forth, blinding the onlookers with a brilliance that smelled of fresh wheat and triumph. Nara laughed, wiping soot from his cheek, and declared that the gods had finally upgraded from dial-up to fiber optic. Ahau bowed, offering a ceremonial cacao cup that fizzed like a soda pop, promising that future eclipses would be less dramatic, unless someone forgets to turn off the lights. The crowd erupted in cheers, children squealing, elders nodding, and even the dog barked a triumphant howl that sounded suspiciously like a howl at the moon in a sitcom. As the sun settled, the village realized they had turned a terrifying void into a shared story, a cosmic meme that would echo through generations. When the last sliver of the moon slipped away, the air smelled like burnt sage and wet stone. The survivors blinked into a sky that had swapped its muted veil for a blaze of newly bright constellations, each star humming like a freshly struck gong. The wind rustled the tattered banners of the camp, carrying whispers of old myths that seemed to crackle in the night. Even the river, which had been a sluggish, muddy snake, now reflected the heavens like a polished mirror. In that moment, everyone felt the electric thrill of being both humbled and hypercharged, as if the cosmos had just handed them a backstage pass. Gathered around a crackling fire, the elders pulled out fresh parchment, still damp from the night's dew, and a set of ink made from crushed beetles and charcoal. With ink-stained fingers, they began to etch a new codex, each stroke a joint revelation that stitched together Babylonian star charts, Maya rain spirals, and the Aboriginal Dreamtime stories. The scent of ink mixed with the smoky pork they roasted, creating a heady perfume that made the air taste like ancient secrets and burnt fat. Laughter bubbled up when a young scribe tried to draw Orion and accidentally turned him into a cartoonish superhero, prompting an eye roll from the high priest who muttered, "Even the gods have bad design days." The codex grew page by page, a living tapestry that smelled of earth, blood, and the sweet promise of shared wonder. As the night deepened, the chorus of crickets turned into a percussion ensemble, keeping time with the beating hearts of the listeners. Stories of nighttime visions, of dragons dancing across the Milky Way, of ancestors sailing on comet tails, wove together like a patchwork quilt made of starlight and sweat. Irony twinkled in the air. The very eclipse that once darkened their world now illuminated their unity, proving that sometimes you need a cosmic blackout to see the true colors of humanity. The grizzled hunter joked that the gods must have been playing a cosmic game of hide and seek, while the women of the tribe hummed a lullaby that sounded suspiciously like a modern pop ballad, only with more drums. The shared laughter echoed across the hills, a reminder that even the most solemn myths can wear a clown's nose. Someone whispered that the newly bright constellation looked oddly like the Death Star, prompting a chorus of snorts and a quick reference to that infamous space opera where rebels fight a giant laser ball. A child, eyes wide as lanterns, shouted, "May the stars be with us," and the elders chuckled, noting that ancient sky watchers probably didn't need a Jedi to interpret a comet's tale. The codex's pages fluttered in the breeze, each line smelling of pine resin and the faint tang of fermented berries used for ink preservation. The scent reminded them of a medieval tavern where scholars debated the meaning of dreams over mead, only now the tavern was a clearing under a galaxy-sized marquee. Even the fire seemed to crackle in Morse code, spelling out a secret message: dream big, or at least don't forget your snack. When dawn finally stretched its rosy fingers over the horizon, the survivors folded the codex like a treasured map and tucked it beneath their armors and skirts. They walked away from the fire with the taste of ash and ambition still on their tongues, each step echoing the rhythm of ancient drums that once guided caravans across desert moonscapes. The sky, now a glittering archive of shared myths, promised that future generations would read these nighttime visions like a favorite comic book, complete with heroic flaws and cheesy one-liners. In that brightening world, the legacy of the eclipse lived on, not as a scar, but as a spark that welded disparate cultures into a single dreaming tapestry. And somewhere, a distant owl hooted as if to say, "Good night, folks, see you in the next dream." The valley lay swaddled in a ghostly veil of mist, the kind that makes you think the world forgot to pay its laundry bill. In its hollow, the healer Myra shuffled between stone cottages, her satchel clinking with dried herbs that smelled like ancient footnotes. Restless Kyan trailed behind, his eyes darting like fireflies trapped in a jar, refusing to settle even as the sun yawned its last. Myra laughed, a sound that cracked the silence like a kettle about to boil, and whispered that the night held a secret worth 1,000 bedtime stories. Together they stepped toward the hill where the moon liked to make its monthly cameo. When the waxing moon slipped over the ridge, the village erupted in a chorus of sighs, incense, and off-key lullabies that could make a banshee blush. Women balanced fragrant bundles of sage and lavender, the smoke curling up like lazy dragons that smelled of Grandma's kitchen and damp earth. Men tapped rhythm sticks, their beats thudding against the cobblestones, while children sang verses that sounded suspiciously like a karaoke version of Twinkle, Twinkle, with extra verses about cheese. The air thickened with sweet, spicy perfume, the scent of burnt resin mingling with the musk of wet wool and the faint hint of Kyan's sweaty socks, a reminder that rituals are never pristine. As the moon's silver grin grew, the villagers bowed, inviting the night to tuck the world into a quilt of quiet. Myra knelt beside Kyan, pulling a handful of moonlit herbs and crushing them between her thumb and forefinger, releasing a scent that tasted like midnight popcorn. She told him with a wink that moon watching was the original do not disturb sign, predating even the first smartphone notification. Kyan scoffed, his cheeks puffing out like a hamster in a wheel, but the irony was palpable. The boy who could not sit still was about to learn the art of doing nothing. Myra's voice rose over the crackle of the fire, narrating the tale of an ancient queen who whispered lullabies to the moon to keep her kingdom from turning into a reality TV nightmare. The child's eyes widened, not from fear, but from the absurdity of a queen negotiating bedtime with a celestial body. As the incense spiraled upward, the village fell into a rhythm that felt like a slow-motion dance from a 90s music video, everyone moving, yet nowhere to go. The moon's glow painted the thatched roofs a soft, buttery hue, and the night air hummed with the low thrum of crickets, like an endless drum solo that never quite hits the climax. Kyan felt his chest loosen, the restless knots untangling like spaghetti after a vigorous stir. He imagined his thoughts drifting away on a fluffy cloud, hitching a ride with the moon, much like a Netflix binge that finally ends with a satisfying credits roll. The villagers, eyes half closed, swayed gently, their breaths syncing with the lunar pulse, inviting sleep as if it were a generous neighbor dropping by with a warm bowl of soup. When the moon reached its apex, Myra gathered the children and whispered a final blessing, promising that the night would guard their dreams like a loyal dog guards the couch. The scent of incense lingered, now mingling with the earthy perfume of dew-soaked grass and the faint, comforting stink of a goat that had just been sheared. Kyan, eyes finally drooping, muttered a half-hearted joke about the moon being the universe's nightlight, and Myra laughed, her chuckle echoing like a distant bell. The village settled into a hush so deep you could hear a single leaf hitting the ground, a sound that felt both absurdly quiet and profoundly loud. And as the moon watched over them, the valley slipped into a slumber so deep, even the mist seemed to snore. When the moon slipped behind Earth's shadow, the village plunged into an uncanny blackness that swallowed the fireflies and made the hearth's glow look like a shy teenager's blush. The wind carried a low, mournful howl that sounded like a distant saxophone solo gone wrong, rattling shutters and rattling nerves. Mothers clutched their babies tighter, the scent of damp straw mixing with the sharp tang of fear like cheap cheese left out in the sun. Children whispered that the sky had swallowed the moon's cheese, and the village elder's beard twitched as if he'd just tasted it. In that sudden night, even the crickets seemed to hold their breath, waiting for a cue that never came. Myra, who could read the sky like a comic book, stepped forward with a lantern that sputtered like an old TV set. She squinted at the ink-black dome, recalling a story her grandmother whispered on moonlit nights, a tale as old as the village's first goat. The legend spoke of the moon's hidden face, a silent mask that could snatch wandering spirits from sleepers' dreams and lock them in a celestial pantry. Myra's mind raced, half serious, half thinking of a Netflix binge where heroes chase shadows, because why not compare a lunar omen to a streaming marathon? She raised her voice, the words cracking like firewood, demanding the darkness reveal its intent. The forgotten myth painted the moon as a shy librarian, shushing restless souls that dared to wander after midnight, filing them away between the pages of night. If the moon's face stayed hidden, those spirits would hitch a ride on dreamers' pillows, turning sweet slumber into a haunted hotel where the concierge is a grumpy owl. Myra imagined the moon's dark side as a giant, cosmic closet, stuffed with socks and nightmares alike, a place even the most daring ghost would avoid. She chuckled, noting the irony that the very thing that lights our tides also hoards our nightmares, like a celebrity who signs autographs but hides their messy backstage life. With a dramatic flourish, she declared that she would summon the moon's light back before anyone woke up feeling like they'd been wrestled by a gelatinous alien. Villagers gathered around the central fire, its smoke curling up like lazy dragons, while the scent of burnt pine mingled with the earthy perfume of wet mud. Old Tomas muttered prayers in a tongue that sounded like a cat hiccuping, and a teenage girl tried to Instagram the eclipse, only to capture a black circle and a caption that read, "When your Wi-Fi goes dark." The air grew thick with the rustle of blankets being pulled tight, the creak of wooden doors, and the occasional thud of a goat stumbling into a haystack, proof that even animals sense when the cosmos is being dramatic. Laughter cracked through the tension when someone joked that the moon must have missed its dentist appointment, leaving it with a gaping grin. Yet beneath the jokes, a palpable dread settled like cold porridge in the belly of every listener. Summoning the old chant, Myra sang the verses with a voice that bounced off the stone walls like a mischievous bat, each note coaxing the hidden moon to peek out. As the first syllable rose, a thin sliver of silver slipped through the veil, painting the thatched roofs with a ghostly glow that smelled faintly of lilac and old parchment. The villagers felt the weight of their own breath lift, as if the night itself had exhaled a sigh of relief, and the restless spirits, deprived of a dark hideout, retreated like toddlers denied candy. In a twist worthy of a superhero movie, the moon winked, literally, sending a flash that made Myra's hair stand up like static on a cat, and the village erupted in cheers that sounded oddly like a stadium wave. From that night on, the eclipse became a cautionary bedtime story, reminding children that even the moon can have a bad hair day, but a brave heart can always bring back the light. Myra slipped her worn sandals onto the dusty trail as the wandering monk, Brother Tashi, shuffled beside her, humming a chant that sounded like a cracked vinyl record of a lullaby. The moon, a swollen silver coin, hung low, spilling cold light over the pine needles that whispered like gossiping old women. Tashi's beard fluttered in the night breeze, and he warned, "The night weaver spins her stories for those who listen, not for those who snore." Myra laughed, recalling a meme about moon phases be like my mood swings, and tightened the strap of her satchel, which smelled of dried figs and the faint sting of goat cheese. The duo set off, their shadows stretching like ink ribbons across the craggy path toward the shrine of Selene. The mountain wind arrived like an angry bartender, slamming gusts of icy air into Myra's face, tasting of pine resin and the metallic tang of old iron. Branches snapped overhead, sending a chorus of creaks that sounded suspiciously like a haunted house soundtrack. Myra pressed her palm to the bark of a twisted oak, feeling the rough bark sweat like sap seep into her skin, grounding her against the wind's relentless taunts. Brother Tashi muttered a prayer, and a sudden gust lifted his robe, revealing a pair of neon green socks, an ironic nod to his youthful spirit. They trudged onward, each step kicking up dust that glowed faintly, as if the ground itself were trying to mimic the moon's soft glow. At last, the shrine of Selene rose from the mist like a giant marble cake, its marble steps slick with dew that smelled of night-blooming jasmine and the faint sourness of forgotten tea. Lanterns flickered, casting amber halos that danced on the stone, while a low hum resonated from the altar, reminiscent of a bass line in a lo-fi chill hop track. Myra inhaled the cool, stone-cold air, feeling the weight of centuries press against her chest, as if the mountain itself were exhaling a sigh of relief. The monk placed a tiny silver offering, a cracked moonstone that looked suspiciously like a broken smartphone screen, onto the altar, chuckling that even the gods need a good upgrade. The shrine seemed to pulse, inviting Myra to weave her own tale into its ancient tapestry. Just as Myra bowed her head, a shadow lunged from behind a marble column. The Night Vale cult, draped in cloaks darker than a blackout on a Netflix binge. Their leader, a gaunt figure named Carr, sneered, "The moon's power is for the chosen, not for wandering dream weavers like you." He brandished a ceremonial dagger that dripped a viscous, amber liquid smelling of burnt incense and stale coffee, making Myra's stomach churn. The air crackled with tension, and for a heartbeat, the only sound was the distant hoot of an owl that sounded oddly like a sarcastic commentator. With a swift, ironic grin, Myra tossed a handful of moon dust onto the altar, causing a burst of silvery light that made Carr's eyes widen like a cat discovering a laser pointer. The sudden flash blinded the cultists, and when the light dimmed, Carr lay sprawled, clutching his dagger as if it were a malfunctioning remote control. Brother Tashi chuckled. "Looks like the Night Weaver finally stitched up that loose thread," while Myra helped the monk gather the scattered moon dust, which now smelled sweet, like fresh laundry on a breezy night. They whispered a promise to share the moon's lullaby with all who needed sleep, not just the elite who hoarded its glow like a secret stash of chocolate. As they descended the shrine, the night wind softened, turning into a gentle lullaby that made the pine needles sway like a crowd at a concert. Myra felt the moon's cool kiss on her cheek, a reminder that even the darkest quests can end with a smile and a perfectly timed pop culture reference. High upon the craggy summit, the wind howled like a chorus of disgruntled banshees, rattling the ancient stone altar where Myra stood. The moon hung low, a silver sickle slicing the night, spilling cold fire onto the jagged rocks. Myra's cloak flapped, smelling of pine sap and the faint musk of damp earth, as she tightened the strap of her moon-forged blade. She could hear the distant hoot of an owl, a reminder that even the night has its gossip. With a grin that tasted of iron and resolve, she whispered, "Time to cut the red thread of nightmares," and stepped into the darkness. From the shadows emerged the Night Weaver, a sorceress draped in midnight silk that seemed stitched from the night itself. Her eyes glowed like twin moons, and she twirled a spindle of moonlight that spun nightmares as thick as spider silk. Each filament hissed, releasing the sour scent of burnt incense and the faint metallic tang of fear. She laughed, a sound that cracked like old parchment, and declared, "Welcome to my Netflix binge of terror." The air grew heavy with the weight of 1,000 restless dreams, each one pulsing like a trapped heartbeat. Myra lunged, her blade flashing like a meteor across a clear night sky, and the clash rang out like a war drum in a silent cathedral. Sparks flew, scattering shards of moonlit glass that tinkled against stone, while the Night Weaver countered with a wave of dark silk that slapped the air with the sound of wet laundry. The ground beneath them trembled, releasing a putrid whiff of damp moss and the sour bite of fierce sweat. Myra felt the sting of a stray nightmare lash her cheek, like a cold slap from an over-enthusiastic fan. Yet she pressed on, her breath a ragged rhythm, her heart drumming a battle hymn louder than any war chant. Spotting a pool of reflected moonlight on a polished slab, Myra seized the opportunity, scooping up the silvery glow as if it were liquid gold. She hurled the luminous liquid at the night weaver, and it burst in a cascade of glittering droplets that sang like shattered glass. The sorceress shrieked, her dark silk unraveling into a tangle of ash and the acrid smell of burnt sugar. With each droplet, the nightmare thread snapped, releasing captive dreams that fluttered away like startled moths. The summit erupted in a chorus of sighs as the moon's silver reclaimed the night, and Myra stood triumphant, dripping with moon juice and a smudge of starlight on her cheek. The sky cleared and the moon smiled down, its face as calm as a seasoned yoga instructor after a marathon session. Dreams, now free, drifted back to sleepers, slipping into their minds like soft blankets of lavender scent and warm cocoa. Myra laughed, wiping moon juice from her blade, and quipped, "Guess the night weaver got a taste of her own medicine. Talk about a plot twist worthy of a Marvel finale." The wind, now gentle, carried away the last remnants of dread, replacing them with the sweet chirp of crickets rehearsing a bedtime lullaby. As she descended the summit, Myra felt the silver thread of destiny humming beneath her boots, promising that every night holds a story waiting to be untangled. Myra trudged back to the thatched roofs, her sandals kicking up the sweet, damp earth that smelled like fermented figs. The village square glowed under a waning crescent, its silver light spilling over the well-worn cobbles like spilled milk. Children whispered about the moon's mood swings, comparing it to a moody teenager on a TikTok binge. Yet the air thrummed with a restless tension, as if the night itself were holding its breath for a story yet untold. Myra lifted her eyes, feeling the pull of ancient lullabies tugging at the edges of her own tired mind. She gathered the elders around the fire, its crackle a percussion of popcorn kernels popping in a cosmic microwave. With a grin, Myra unveiled the renewed moon ritual, a dance that wove light and shadow together like a cat chasing laser beams. First, they lit lanterns of amber wax, then draped them in black cloth, creating pockets of darkness that swallowed the glow just enough to keep the night from getting cocky. The villagers whispered the verses, their voices rising and falling like a tide that refused to be tamed by a GPS-guided surfboard. The ritual promised balance, enough moonlight to guide dreams, but enough shade to keep nightmares from setting up camp. As the ceremony unfolded, the scent of pine resin mingled with the earthy perfume of wet soil, making the air feel like a forest sauna. Hands clapped, feet stamped, and a stray goat bleated in perfect timing, as if it had been hired as a percussionist. Laughter bubbled up when old Joran tried to mimic the moon's crescent grin, and ended up looking like a half-eaten cheese wheel. The villagers felt the cool silver wash over their shoulders, then the soft black veil settle like a cozy blanket, and they sighed in unison, a chorus of relief louder than a medieval tavern's karaoke night. Even the crickets seemed to pause, listening for the promise of uninterrupted snooze time. Kyan, who had been tossing like a pancake in a hurricane, finally felt his eyelids grow heavy as moon honey. He settled onto his straw mattress, the scent of fresh herbs from the hearth wrapping around him like a mother's hug. The balanced light painted gentle patterns on his ceiling, while the shadows whispered jokes about sleeping like a sloth on a Sunday. Within minutes, Kyan slipped into a dream-filled slumber, chasing dragons that breathed lavender smoke and riding comets that smelled faintly of roasted chestnuts. He snored softly, a rhythm that could have been the opening bars of a lullaby composed by a bored bard. By dawn, the village awoke refreshed, their faces glowing brighter than a sunrise filter on Instagram. Myra watched them stretch, their muscles humming with the quiet power of a well-tuned harp. The moon, now a shy half-smile, slipped away as if embarrassed by its own brilliance, leaving behind a sky as clear as a freshly cleaned window. The people laughed, noting that they had finally learned to sleep without needing a "do not disturb" sign on their souls. And so the legend of the balanced moon ritual spread, a story told around fire pits for generations, reminding everyone that even the night needs a little humor and a dash of cosmic choreography. In the amber glow of dawn, the valley of Asteria stretched like a bowl of honey-colored wheat, its river humming a lazy lullaby. The thatched huts huddled together, exhaling the scent of smoked goat cheese and damp earth. Lyra, the priestess with ink-stained fingertips, slipped into the cavern behind the altar, where cobwebs clung like old curtains. There, tucked beneath a slab of basalt, she uncovered a brittle sky map etched in obsidian ink, its constellations glowing faintly as if they remembered the night. Her heart thumped louder than the village drums, for the map seemed older than the oldest legend whispered around the fire. The map was not a pretty picture, it was a cosmic spreadsheet, each star paired with a ritual as precise as a baker's recipe. Lyra traced Orion's belt and found a note that instructed the villagers to chant the starlight sigh when the hunter's bow rose high. When she showed the elders the link between the rising of Cassiopeia and the nightly incense offering, they gasped like goats discovering a new patch of grass. The council, half amused and half terrified, debated whether the heavens were sending a reminder or a prank from some mischievous sky god. In the end, they decided to follow the map, because who could argue with a diagram that looked like it was drawn by a caffeinated astronomer? That night, the villagers gathered on the hilltop, lanterns flickering like fireflies on caffeine, and began the first synchronized bedtime ritual. As the constellation of the Great Bear tipped over the horizon, the women sang low lullabies, while the men hammered soft drums that sounded suspiciously like a distant bass line from a 90s video game. The scent of pine resin and wet moss rose, mixing with the earthy perfume of night-blooming jasmine that clung to the air like a sweet aftershave. The children, eyes wide as moon craters, were tucked into woven hammocks that squeaked under their weight, prompting a chorus of giggles and a few muttered curses about creaky furniture from the underworld. By the time the last star blinked out, even the village dogs were snoring in perfect harmony, as if they'd been trained by a canine choir conductor. The following dawn, the valley awoke to a silence so profound it felt like the world had hit the pause button on a Netflix binge. Farmers found their wheat swaying in perfect rows, as if the wind had taken a yoga class and learned the art of balance. Even the old blacksmith, who usually snored like a grumbling furnace, reported a dream of riding a comet while sipping honey-ed tea, a bizarre mash-up of Star Wars and a medieval tea party. The elders whispered that the stars had granted them a night of true rest, while the mischievous twins blamed the map for making the village's goats start doing synchronized moonwalks across the meadow. Laughter echoed through the valley, and Lyra, eyes glittering, declared that the cosmos had finally handed them a schedule better than any modern calendar app. From that night onward, Asteria's sleep cycles became as regular as the ticking of a well-oiled clock, each bedtime announced by the twinkling of a specific constellation. The villagers learned to rise with the first glimmer of Vega, their muscles stretching like rubber bands ready for the day's chores. Tourists, wandering shepherds from neighboring valleys, began to ask for star-aligned insomnia cures, only to leave with a sack of moon dust and a grin. Lyra kept the sky map safe, polishing it with oil from the goat's milk, because nothing says reverence like a little dairy shine. And whenever a newcomer scoffed at the idea of sleeping with the stars, the valley would simply point to the night sky and say, "Hey, even the universe needs its beauty sleep." When the moon hung like a silver sickle over the valley, Lyra slipped into the loom shop where Orion, the village weaver, was already humming an old lullaby. The air smelled of pine resin and goat milk, a comforting mix that reminded everyone of bedtime stories told by firelight. Orion greeted her with a grin as wide as a crescent, brandishing a skein that shimmered like spilled starlight. Together they whispered about the ancient belief that the night sky could be stitched into cloth to catch wandering dreams. The villagers gathered, eyes bright, waiting for the first thread of the celestial tapestry to be drawn. Orion's fingers danced over a spindle spun from moon-beaten oak, pulling fibers dyed with crushed beetroot, midnight berries, and a pinch of powdered meteoric iron. The loom creaked, echoing like a distant thunderstorm, while sparks of phosphorescent algae glowed in the dim workshop, casting a ghostly green hue. Lyra added strands of silken moth wing, each one catching the faint scent of damp earth after rain, making the tapestry pulse with a living glow. As the fabric grew, it began to mirror the Milky Way, swirls of luminous white, deep indigo, and specks of gold that twinkled when the wind brushed the shutters. The whole process reeked of sweat, wool, and the occasional stray goat that tried to nibble the glowing yarn, causing a chorus of startled yelps. When the final panel was ready, Orion and Lyra rolled it out in the town square, unfurling a night sky that seemed to have leapt from the heavens onto the cobblestones. Families were invited to drape the luminous cloth over their sleeping chambers, the fabric humming softly like a lullaby sung by the wind. The patterns spirals that mimicked constellations, ribbons that traced the path of ancient comets, were said to steer dreams toward stories written in starlight. Mothers tucked their children beneath the glowing sheets, and the scent of lavender mixed with the faint ozone of the tapestry, coaxing sleepy sighs. Even the village dog, a shaggy mutt named Sirius, curled up on the edge, his tail thumping in rhythm with the soft glow. Word spread faster than gossip at a market, and soon the whole valley was draped in star-woven blankets, turning every hut into a miniature planetarium. The elders chuckled, noting that the villagers now dreamed of heroic space battles, yet still woke up with the same old headache from sleeping on a pine-scented pillow. One night, a traveling minstrel compared the scene to a Netflix binge of cosmic dramas, except with fewer commercials and more actual constellations. Orion winked, replying that at least their subscription was free, and the only buffering came from a moth that got stuck in the weave. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. They were chasing the stars while their feet were firmly planted in muddy boots. As the first light of dawn brushed the horizon, the tapestries glowed faintly, like the afterglow of a fireworks show that never quite faded. The villagers awoke with stories of sailing on silver rivers of light, of meeting a talking owl who recited Shakespeare in a galaxy far, far away. Lyra laughed, tasting the lingering sweetness of honeyed tea on her tongue, while Orion brushed specks of stardust from his sleeves, muttering that the universe had a funny way of stitching itself into everyday life. The scent of fresh bread rose from the bakery, mixing with the lingering aroma of night-bloomed jasmine that clung to the tapestries. And so, the celestial looms continued to spin, weaving night into day, dream into legend, and reminding everyone that even the gloomiest sleep could be brightened by a little bit of star stuff. When the harvest moon swelled like a golden pancake over the ridge, the village of Brindle Hollow gathered around the crackling fire. A lanky traveler, his cloak dusted with starlight, swaggered into the circle, clutching a battered brass telescope that smelled of pine sap and old ink. He tipped his hat, letting the moonlight catch the silver filigree on his wrist, and the children squealed as if a cat had just learned to juggle. The scent of roasted chestnuts and damp earth mingled with the distant hoot of an owl, setting the stage for a night that would outshine any festival. With a grin wider than the Milky Way, he announced he carried a story older than the hills themselves. He began with the legend of the Orion Belt, 3 blazing jewels that the ancient sky watchers claimed were forged in a supernova's afterglow. He described how each star pulsed like a drumbeat, a cosmic metronome that could coax even the most restless farmer into a dream. The villagers listened, eyes widening as he mimicked the twinkling with his fingers, the sound of his voice rustling like dry leaves in a midnight breeze. He warned, half joking, that ignoring the belt's rhythm would leave you as clueless as a Netflix binge watcher stuck in the 1990s. By the time he finished, the crowd felt the tug of the heavens, as if the night itself had slipped a secret note into their pockets. At his cue, the villagers formed a loose circle, inhaling the cool, pine-scented air and exhaling the day's sweat and gossip. He taught them a chant that synced each breath to the imagined pulsar beats of Orion's middle star, a rhythm as steady as a blacksmith's hammer, but softer than a lover's whisper. The chant rose and fell, a chorus of throaty hums that made the fire's crackle sound like distant thunder. Even the village dog, a scruffy mutt named Sirius, tilted his head and howled in perfect time, adding a comic bark to the symphony. The air grew thick with the smell of wet wool and anticipation, and the night seemed to pulse in tandem with their chests. Soon the villagers' eyes drooped, their bodies sinking into the earth like seedlings drinking rain, while the chant lingered like a lullaby humming in the background. Dreams slipped through the veil, vivid as oil paintings, showing fields of golden grain dancing with constellations and a river that sang the names of forgotten ancestors. Some awoke with a sudden craving for fermented goat cheese, others with the uncanny certainty that a comet would visit the next harvest. The prophetic visions were as messy as a toddler's finger paint, some glorious, some absurdly mundane, but all left a lingering taste of starlight on their tongues. The night's magic proved that a simple rhythm could unlock the universe's gossip booth, right in the middle of a humble hamlet. When dawn finally stretched its pink fingers over the horizon, the villagers emerged blinking, their hair smelling of smoke and moon dust, and their hearts still thumping to Orion's beat. The traveling astronomer tipped his hat again, winking as if to say, "May the force be with your naps," a nod to the galaxy far-away saga that even the village bard had heard in a traveling troupe's performance. He slipped away, leaving behind a battered telescope, a half-eaten loaf, and the lingering echo of the chant that now haunted every bedtime. The children giggled, claiming they could hear the belt stars snoring, while the elders muttered about the irony of learning sleep tricks from a wanderer who probably never slept. And so, under the same harvest moon, the village vowed to chant each night, proving that even the oldest myths can be rebooted like a classic video game, just with more wool and fewer cheat codes. The day the sun blinked out, the village's stone circle fell silent. Children stopped humming the lullaby of the constellations, and the air grew thick with the smell of damp earth and burnt incense. For generations, they had timed their sleep to the first glimmer of dawn, a ritual as precise as a sundial. When the moon's shadow swallowed the sky, the familiar glow that coaxed eyelids shut vanished, leaving them squinting in a cold, violet hush. Even the crickets seemed to hold their breath, as if the universe itself had pressed the pause button on bedtime. Panic rippled through the crowd like a spilled pot of soup, splattering hot broth onto stone benches. Elders clutched their scrolls, muttering that the eclipse was a bad omen, a celestial prank from the gods who liked to mess with nap schedules. Lyra, the youngest keeper of the night fire, stepped forward, her eyes glittering like twin meteors against the dimming horizon. She laughed, a sharp, nervous sound that cut through the gloom, declaring that they would not let a shadow steal their dreams. With a wink at the grumbling bakers, she announced a daring rite that would turn the darkness into a new kind of lullaby. The rite began at the heart of the circle, where a massive obsidian bowl was filled with water from the river that sang of moonlit tides. Lyra whispered ancient verses, her voice echoing off the stone walls like a radio signal lost in space, while the eclipse draped its inky cloak over the village. She tossed a handful of crushed night bloom petals into the water, and they unfurled like tiny black fireworks, releasing a scent of wet moss and burnt sugar. The community gathered, each person pressing a palm to the bowl, feeling the chill of the void seep into their skin, a reminder that darkness can be as intimate as a hug. As the sun's corona flickered like a dying neon sign, the water glowed faintly, casting ghostly silhouettes that danced to the rhythm of a heartbeat drum. When the eclipse reached its peak, Lyra commanded everyone to close their eyes and breathe in the void, then exhale the light they carried inside. The villagers obliged, inhaling the cool, metallic taste of night air, exhaling a puff of warm breath that smelled faintly of roasted chestnuts. In that suspended moment, they discovered a new cadence, a sleep that did not depend solely on sunrise, but also on the comforting embrace of shadow. The rite ended with a chorus of giggles as someone shouted, "We've just invented night mode for humanity," a joke that would later echo in tavern tales. The elders, initially skeptical, nodded slowly, realizing that the eclipse had gifted them a backup battery for their souls. As the sun's edge slipped back into view, the village awoke feeling oddly refreshed, as if they had slept through a cosmic reboot. Lyra's new practice, dubbed the eclipse slumber, was recorded on parchment, illustrated with doodles of moons wearing sunglasses, a nod to modern pop culture. Families now tucked their children under blankets scented with night bloom, whispering that the void is just a quiet cousin of daylight. The ritual spread beyond the stone circle, reaching distant hamlets that began to greet each eclipse with a collective yawn and a toast of spiced tea. And so, the community learned to honor both light and void, proving that even the darkest shadow can be a cozy blanket. Just ask any Jedi who's ever taken a nap on the Death Star. When the moon finally slipped back into its silvery throne, the village erupted in a chorus of cheers that rattled the stone walls. Women tossed handfuls of dried rosemary into the air, its sharp perfume mingling with the lingering scent of burnt pine. The elders, hunched like ancient oaks, lifted their wooden drums and beat a rhythm that echoed the thrum of the eclipse's heartbeat. Children chased the flickering shadows, slipping on muddy paths and laughing as if the world had just been rebooted. Even the stray goat seemed to nod approvingly, its beady eyes reflecting the first true sunrise after darkness. At the heart of the clearing, the chief struck a ceremonial stone, and a spark leapt like a mischievous sprite, birthing the cosmic hearth. They piled the fire with hand-carved logs, each bearing a rune of a different star, and the flames licked the night, turning the night sky into a living tapestry. The hearth's glow painted the villagers' faces orange, while the smoke curled up, tasting of wet earth and burnt butter, an aroma that would later be called the scent of ambition by the village poet. A chorus of oaths rose, promising that this fire would never die, lest the night sky lose its nightly lullaby. The ritual ended with a slapstick moment when the chief's hat fell into the blaze, prompting a collective gasp and a burst of laughter that sounded like distant thunder. From that night onward, the hearth became a mirror for the heavens, its flames shifting hue with each lunar phase as if the fire itself kept a secret calendar. When the moon was a thin crescent, the fire glowed a shy amber. When it swelled full, the blaze blazed crimson, casting the villagers in a dramatic, cinematic light reminiscent of a blockbuster climax. The crackle of the wood sang a lullaby that matched the distant hoot of owls, coaxing even the most stubborn insomniac into dreamland. Mothers tucked their babies against the heat, feeling the rhythm of the fire sync with the tiny heartbeats, while fathers whispered legends of star-bound voyages that would one day be as common as bedtime stories. In the corners, the old storyteller, who claimed to have once seen a comet in his soup, chuckled that the hearth was the universe's own Netflix, always streaming, never buffering. Sleep under the cosmic hearth felt like slipping into a velvet bag of marshmallows, except the scent was a blend of soot, pine resin, and the faint tang of yesterday's goat cheese. The villagers would snuggle into their woven mats, the heat seeping into their bones, and the fire's glow would paint their dreams with constellations that twinkled like sequins on a pop star's costume. Ironically, the night's silence was punctuated by the occasional snort of a snoring elder, reminding everyone that even the wise can be embarrassingly human. A mischievous teen once tried to record the fire's crackle on a wooden drum, only to discover the rhythm sounded suspiciously like the opening theme of a famous space opera, much to the chagrin of the village bard, who claimed he'd never heard such a thing. Yet amid the giggles and groans, the fire's steady pulse assured each sleeper that the cosmos was a reliable host, never canceling its nightly performance. Generations later, the story of the cosmic hearth would be whispered around new fires, each ember a promise that the night sky remains a passport to wonder. Younglings would stare at the dancing flames, eyes wide as saucers, and imagine themselves sailing on silver sails across a sea of stars, all while snuggled in their humble straw beds. The hearth's glow, forever tied to the lunar cycle, ensured that no child would ever miss the nightly show, a celestial broadcast that required no ticket, only a willing heart and a bit of warmth. In the village's lore, the fire became a bridge, a literal hearth that turned night into a voyage rather than a void, turning bedtime into an adventure worthy of a hero's quest. And so, each night, as the fire crackled and the night sky unfurled, the villagers drifted off, confident that tomorrow's dreams would be guided by the same ancient, ever-watchful stars.